Understanding a foreign language is hard, obviously.
Και ότι έχει πολλούς φοιτητές και έχει και την παραλία δίπλα.
I mean, that's literally Greek to me. But as you learn words and become more comfortable, you can begin to break down sentences and understand a foreign language. Today, I'm going to show you some techniques you can use to understand the language you're learning. First, I quickly want to talk about why we care about understanding. Languages are learned by spending lots of time understanding that language. But you don't just start understanding everything like you do with English. You start from basically nothing. It's like you're a baby again, looking up with your big round eyes to your parents as they sound like adults from Charlie Brown. But you're no longer a baby and can actually take control of the process. You're no longer a passenger in your brain, but the driver. You can learn techniques and tactics to learn a language more quickly than a baby. Many people throw themselves right into the deep end and put on a TV show or movie in their target language and stare at the screen for a few hours, understanding basically nothing, and thus learning basically nothing. The alternative to that is interacting with the language, spending time with it to break it down and digging into the words, puzzling through them and understanding more than if you just let it wash over you. This is very important if you want to feel like you're making progress. It's very tangible. If you're someone who does a lot of just watching or just listening without understanding much, I highly recommend you try this. Or if you're a person who gets frustrated when things don't immediately make sense, I also recommend you try this. Well, actually, I think that everybody should try this, but I'm a little biased. Anyway, let's talk about what this is. What am I talking about? Breaking down, puzzling through, and understanding a language is a skill, and it takes practice. I'm going to show you as best as I can, but you'll need to experiment, try it out, and see what works for you. The technique I like most doesn't have a name as far as I'm aware, but it's similar to a gloss. Glossing is a linguistics term for breaking down a sentence into its technical components. I'll give you an example. First person singular, future, give, second singular, indefinite example, that sort of thing. As you can see, the gloss doesn't mean much unless you're a linguist. But the same idea can be useful for breaking down a foreign sentence. Let's take a look at this real sentence that I recently did this with in my own language study. This example is going to be pretty simple since I just want to show the general process, but you can and probably should do it with more complicated sentences.
Teď nožem nakrájíme zeleninu.
The translation for the sentence would be something like, now we cut vegetables with a knife. Or maybe, now we use a knife to cut the vegetables. That sort of thing. But as you can see, the English version has a lot more words than the Czech does. But yet, they mean the same thing. And so if you just take the translation, you end up not really understanding why the sentence means what it means. So I take an approach where I break down the pieces to make sure I'm understanding why and where that meaning comes from. Apologies about my pronunciation to any Czech speakers. I've been at it for less than 3 months and I'm trying my best. But I know that teď means now and that zelenina is vegetable. And through context, I'm inferring the verb to cut or to chop. And then the word I was primarily focused on here was nožem. When I look it up, it comes up as a version of nůž, and it means knife. But I needed to figure out how now, chop, knife, and vegetable all combine to make a coherent sentence. Since I'm still very early on, I just made a guess. Now we cut vegetables with a knife. And then I checked with the translation on DeepL, which I don't trust fully, but it told me I was basically right, and so I went with it and moved on. But just getting the translation doesn't mean much. You should also think about what the sentence really means. I can see that with the knife is actually just one word, but it means the same thing as the 3 words. And so I remind myself that there's no word for or the, and that the cases, the ending there, means that you don't need to put the word with when something is being used to do something else. And so, nožem is more like a knife with, sort of. I know that the endings of verbs determine who is doing the action and recognize it as the we ending, and that I remind myself that plurals also change the ending, lots of ending changing here, which is why it's zeleninu and not zelenina. So in my head, I now think about it being now, a knife with cut-we vegetables. This piecing apart and breaking down the sentence into its parts and its own logic is very helpful for understanding why things mean what they do. You do need to be careful not to assume that everything works how you think it works. You're still just guessing and won't have an actual internal spell checker until you're several hundred hours into the process. But starting now, verifying and struggling with the language to find some sense within the language really helps you understand that new language. Another way to do it is to think about the relationships between everything in the sentence and act it out. It's sort of the same idea, but a little more physical. Kind of like how someone would try to act out the sentence if they were talking to a 2-year-old. Teď nožem nakrájíme zeleninu. Obviously, doing a whole improv bit is pretty time inefficient, but you can combine things together or do them only in your head, or just focus on the main nouns and verbs. You may actually be very surprised how much this helps. Replaying a scene that you just watched but doing the key words can help you follow a story by knowing just a few words and taking your time. So, before I end the video, I want to talk about a few things. First, this is different from translating a whole sentence in your head. You're really just using English words as placeholders in this exercise. Eventually, you can do the same thing fully in the target language, but for now, using English like this is totally fine. You'll grow out of it eventually. Translating in your head is thinking about how it'd be said in English and going, oh, that doesn't really make sense if you translate it like this, so I'll do it like this, or something like that. But if you let the target language rule your English and kind of recreate new rules, you won't be translating. Second, why is this useful? The main reason is that it pushes you beyond what you could otherwise understand. Sometimes you might think you know what's going on, but before you can really verify that, the story has moved on and you're hearing something else. This removes the verification step that's needed for actually improving your ability in something. Over the course of 5,000 to 10,000 hours, your brain would be able to start self-verifying, but that's a very slow process. And that's why it takes babies well over a decade of constant language use to sound at all coherent.
I can communicate just fine, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to offend. But as an adult, if you use tools to aid in that verification process, it allows your brain to solidify learning much quicker. We see lots of people make the mistake of doing too much free flow and not enough interactive. Free flow is when you're just letting the language wash over you and following what you can, but not slowing down to do much verification. Interactive is when you introduce some kind of additional focus element, such as pausing, looking up words, puzzling through the language like we just talked about, the sorts of things that slow down the language and allow you to work through it and understand more. And if you don't do enough of that working with the language, your growth rate in the language ends up being so slow that you hardly notice any progress at all, if you're making any. But if you do this sort of brain training every day with the language, you'll notice that your comprehension goes up a lot quite quickly. Honestly, give it a shot. Lastly, this may hurt your brain. This is a fairly intensive activity, but that's normal. If it doesn't hurt your head at least a little bit, then you can probably push yourself a bit harder and do more difficult content. As they say, no pain, no gain. To wrap it up with an analogy, I'd like to think of it as going to the gym. Let's say you're on a sports team and each day your team meets in the gym to do strength training, balance exercises, and other various sporty things. You practice with heavy weights, even though the ball that you use during the game is pretty light. That gym time is the intensive, interactive working through the language, and then going out and doing free flow is like game time. During a game, you don't stop to do 10 squats, but you're glad that you've been pushing yourself in the gym since you're stronger than ever. So, get out there and start trying to piece apart some sentences. See what you realize or discover and let me know down in the comments. I'd love to know what you find. Best of luck out there, and as always, happy immersing.